Charles Chevelle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I want to congratulate you and your fellow presiding officers on your re-elections to office, and also to all returning members to the House. Congratulations on your re-elections. To all new members, congratulations on your elections. To new members who've already made their maiden statements, congratulations, particularly to my four Labour colleagues, David Clark, Andrew Little, Dr Megan Woods and Renard Tinakartney, on the superb speeches that they made the other night in the House, but also to all the other members who've made those maiden speeches. And to those who haven't yet made maiden speeches, best of luck. It's a great experience and one to really treasure. Mr Speaker, I feel it's a great privilege to be able to speak in the address in reply debate to the speech from the throne, particularly to support the amendment that's been moved by my friend and colleague, our new leader, David Shearer. And I want to read the amendment in full, sir, because it merits repeating. The amendment is, and that the national-led government will sell New Zealand's assets against the will of the public. The government has no ideas to create jobs or a clean and innovative New Zealand, that the government is widening the gap between the very rich and the rest, and that therefore this House has no confidence in the national-led government. Now, sir, that amendment has my wholehearted support and those of my colleagues, and it's been reinforced by the handling of the Crayfor Farms affair. Sir, it's useful, I think, to just mention a bit of the background to that matter. The Penguin Company made an offer for the Crayfor Farms. That was accepted by receivers Kortementha early last year, but it was conditional on Penguin getting Overseas Investment Office approval. And it should be remembered that those farms total nearly 8,000 hectares, and they comprise 16 central and southern North Island properties. They've been in receivership for more than 2 years now. The receivers gave Penguin until January the 31st, 2011 to make its offer, understood to be $210 to $220 million unconditional. On Friday the 20th of January, the Overseas Investment Office did provide its recommendation on the sale to Lands Minister, the Honourable Maurice Williamson, and Associate Finance Minister, the Honourable Jonathan Coleman. After this, Penguin waited until the 27th of January 2012 for the ministers involved to reach a decision to allow the purchase to proceed. The success of the bid relied heavily on the involvement of Landcorp, a state-owned enterprise, in operating the farms, as Shanghai Penguin could not prove that they had any relevant experience and skill in farming practices. It's understood that Landcorp, on behalf of the taxpayer, is to be paying $18 million a year, effectively to rent the farms back from Shanghai Penguin. Landcorp, of course, had earlier bid for the farms, but was unsuccessful. Now, sir, a Kiwi group led containing a consortium last year offered $171.5 million for the farm to be divided amongst members of the consortium. Receivers said the offer was too cheap, and Kortementha reminded everybody concerned that they were legally obliged to try for the highest price for the estate. That was the decision that was taken to the Overseas Investment Office. That was the matter that was taken on to the High Court for judicial review on the 3rd of February. And the decision yesterday by Justice Miller to overturn the sale means that the office must reconsider its recommendation in light of the interpretation that was set out by the High Court in its decision. There are 3 points that I think it is worth having on the record of the House about the decision. In setting aside the decision, the court said first that the ministers involved misdirected themselves on the law. And the essence of the misdirection was that by only comparing Shanghai Penguin's bid against the status quo of the farms, rather than against what another New Zealand investor would do with them, and which was deemed likely similar to Shanghai Penguin's development plans, was a fundamental error. And then ministers ignored and we hear from one of the ministers in error that this was a process that's been used down the ages. Well, actually, he knows that's not right, because it's not the process that the Honourable David Parker employed in respect of the Auckland International Airport. He did something that minister refused to do, apply his own judgment in the national interest to the decision. Instead of just saying, we'll flog it to the highest bidder because that suits us, he said, what is actually in New Zealand's national interest? And that is the difference between the previous administration under Labour and the current administration. We actually did think about what mattered for New Zealand, and we made decisions accordingly. Sir, the second key part of the decision of Justice Miller was that ministers were held to have ignored clear evidence that the benefits will accrue anyway should the land remain in New Zealand ownership. Now, given that economic benefits would also be realised if the farms were sold to a New Zealand buyer, the Shanghai Penguin bid could not claim to be adding substantial benefit to the country. And that is a basic and fundamental problem with the reasoning process used by the ministers. And finally, sir, and I think most damningly, the minister's error was not a mere technicality, and the economic benefits caused by the overseas investment were materially overstated. Now, it's going to be very hard, despite what we've heard in answers to questions from ministers, when this decision has to be taken again, for that bid to be upheld. Very, very hard indeed. And the High Court's decision to overturn the sale shows that National simply got it wrong, and in doing so, as I said earlier, sir, just ignored the best interests of New Zealanders. And it's worse than that, sir, because if one looks at the entire process, there's some suspicions that are naturally arising as a result of the way in which the process was handled. It seems pretty clear, actually stepping back, that the government always intended to sell this valuable land to Shanghai Penguin, despite clear evidence that it was not the right decision for New Zealand, sir. Now, John Key repeatedly claimed that the law didn't allow him or his ministers to overrule a recommendation made by the Overseas Investment Office to approve the Chinese consortium's application. That is plainly wrong, and that is certainly very different to the sort of reasoning process employed, for example, by David Parker. Now, Justice Miller's decision shows, sir, that John Key's claims was wrong, and that this was simply a way of justifying erroneous decision-making on the part of the two ministers that I've referred to. Ministers do have the ability, clear ability, sir, to turn down recommendations by the Overseas Investment Office. The test is very clear in the Act. They're not entitled to depart from the test in the Act, but they are entitled and required to apply their own judgment to that test. In fact, the Act goes so far as to say, once they've received the advice from the office, they can consult with whomever they like in reaching their final decision. And there's simply no evidence that either of these ministers applied the independent judgment in the interests of the country that we would expect them to. Now, we said, sir, on this side of the House, that the decision to sell Shanghai Penguin was wrong. It was not in New Zealand's national interest. We all want foreign direct investment, but we don't want to sell valuable land to foreign investors only to see profits that could have been reaped by New Zealand farmers injected into our own economy heading offshore. Sir John Key's repeatedly warned that there's a risk that New Zealanders could become tenants in our own land. Well, this is now his chance to make sure that that doesn't happen in this case. Sir, we need to be setting a high standard for any further investment. We need an absolute assurance that any investment will add more value and provide more opportunities for New Zealanders. And, sir, above all, we need competent ministers with a plan to build a prosperous, fair and vibrant society. And, sir, sadly, despite the shouts and shrieks from the ministers concerned, who now seem very wise after the event, the sad thing about this case shows that we don't have a cadre of ministers with those skills or that commitment as members of the second key national government. And, sir, that's why I wholeheartedly support the amendment that David Shearer has moved to the motion.
Honourable Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, I must say it's great to be back in Parliament, and I want to congratulate you and your fellow officers on your elevation in your case and re-election for the Speaker to your positions. And I'd like to